Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic podcast. So I know that this is a very special time for Christians. So I figured that I'm gonna do something and ruin it.
So basically, what I was thinking of was, I can't believe you've done this.
So recently I came across a video by Islamophobe Colin. His channel is called Islam Critique. So let's see what he says and I'll make my response, inshallah.
Welcome back, everyone. If you've been critiquing Islam for more than, let's say 5 minutes, you've noticed a trend. First, a claim that shows the truth of Islam oozes out of the Muslim apologetic world. Second, the claim is closely scrutinized by Islamophobes and racists, because, obviously, who else would critique Islam? Third, Muslim apologists, beaten again by the age of the internet, which seems to continually take them by surprise, retreat, defeated, again. Fourth, we say to the popular Muslim world, I told you so. Let's reminisce. What shows the truth of Islam better than the scientific miracles?
As if they thought that it was a slip of the tongue. I'll repeat it again, very carefully. The scientific miracles argument in the Quran got debunked.
What can I say? Colin. I know this may come as a shock to you, but I actually saw that video. I made a whole live stream about it. In the video, Ali Dawa never said that scientific miracles argument in its entirety has been debunked.
Is there certain facts, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the depths of the ocean, where if you put your hand up, there are layers and layers of darkness? We can say, wow, that is very interesting, because now recent discoveries do show that. So I'm not saying totally you can't use it, but I'm saying to use science as a yardstick, this is wrong. The Quran is our yardstick.
If you watched the full video, then you would know that he didn't say that. What he said is that you can use this type of arguments as long as these arguments are backed by the classical rulings of interpreting the Quran. Because we have a method by which we interpret the Quran. We cannot just interpret the Quran however we like. Now, there are certain verses that actually does fit that criteria that we can use as a scientific argument or show the accuracy of the Quran. So these arguments can be used. His whole video was about being careful, not that you cannot use it at all. I don't know. Such an honest person like yourself, I don't know how you missed this. Maybe you only watched 5 seconds of it. I don't know why you would do that.
I told you so. Or how about the Quran has been perfectly preserved?
The standard narrative has holes in it. That's what I'm going to say. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions.
I told you so. Again, but at least...
So basically, here's what many Christians, polemics and apologists do, right? It seems like a trend, right? At first, they act like Muslims are a monolith, as if Muslims agree on everything, especially Muslim apologists. Then he's quoting Muslim apologists that agree with him and ignoring the others that don't. Then he's claiming that, see, these Muslims are agreeing with us. Therefore, they in the past made a mistake and now agreeing with us because we called them out. It's us, we did it, guys. And rinse and repeat, that's what's happening, right? Except that's not quite what's happening. What's actually happening is you're seeing that there's disagreements among Muslims on this issue. You're choosing Muslims that agree with you and you're completely ignoring Muslims that don't, right? Like, for example, let's look at the example of Yasir Qadhi, right? Yasir Qadhi has been criticized both in the past and in present time by Muslims. And Muslims have been doing that because Muslims are not a monolith. We disagree, right? So then why are you only choosing Yasir Qadhi and ignoring other Muslims that disagree with him? Why don't you quote Farid's response?
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Here, he's basically committing the cherry-picking fallacy. He's only picking Muslims that agree with them and completely ignoring Muslims that don't agree with him. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, he's strawmanning Yasir Qadhi. Like, Yasir Qadhi didn't even say that the Quran is not perfectly preserved. As a matter of fact, your buddy or your boss, David Wood, himself quoted Yasir Qadhi as saying that the Quran has been preserved word for word, letter for letter.
Here's Sheikh Yasir Qadhi telling a popular audience that since the time of Caliph Uthman, no 2 copies of the Quran have ever differed in even a single word or letter.
So the Caliph Uthman standardized the copies of the Quran, and therefore from his time up until our time there has never been 2 copies of the Quran that are different even in one letter or one word.
Perfect preservation right down to the letter.
And he tried to show us this supposed contradiction. What in reality, it wasn't a contradiction. At one point, he was talking about the text of the Quran. In other point, he was talking about the recitation of the Quran, which is two completely different things, right? But here, your boss, David Wood, clearly quotes him as saying that, Quran has been perfectly preserved. So why didn't you quote him then? What happened to that footage?
And you said clearly that the narrative has holes.
Narrative has holes. Yeah. That's what I said.
Number one, did you say that first?
I said the narrative has holes, but about what? About what exactly? About the preservation of the Quran? A'udhu billah. A'udhu billah. My interview is very clear. And also I said that, sometimes in an interview you don't use the best words. And I said that no doubt, astaghfirullah, the words weren't the best. But I was not speaking about the preservation of the Quran. A'udhu billah. It's very clear. It was about one of the most technical issues, which is ahruf and qira'at. Certain issues arose about my position about ahruf and qira'at that other people who perhaps haven't studied as deeply, they found very problematic. And they accused me of becoming mubtadi' or dal or even kafir because they didn't, So these issues had to be clarified. So I said, the majority opinion of ahruf and qira'at, I don't agree with it. And the narrative has holes in it. I agree, I shouldn't have used those wordings. Astaghfirullah al-azim. It's a very painful wording. The kuffar, and even some of my critics, they began saying, he is saying the Quran. A'udhu billah. A'udhu billah.
You have to clarify it.
A'udhu billah. يا أخي الشك في القرآن كفر يا شيخ. أعوذ بالله. الشك في القرآن كفر. أعوذ بالله. إنا نحن نزل الذكر وإنا له حافظون. How can anybody accuse another Muslim? But look at the interview. Wallahi, it is crystal clear. I'm talking about حقيقة الأحرف, the reality of ahruf, the reality of his relationship with the Qur'an.
By the way, please note the issue of ahruf and qiraat is about the different recitations of the Quran. The preservation of the Quran can be proven by the Uthmanic manuscript alone. On top of it, we have endless chain of transmissions. However, when it comes to history and relation between ahruf and qiraat, Yasir Qadhi disagrees with most scholars on this issue. He takes the opinion of minority scholars. Again, please note, I disagree with him. However, to say he is saying the Quran is not preserved is clearly a strawman, or in this case, a lie.
What happened? There's no way you're possibly lying to your audience, because that's what Christianity teaches, to lie to people to promote your religion. There's no way you guys would lie to promote your religion, right? Such a good person like yourself, such a sweet little boy. There's no way you would ever do something like that, right?
The Quran does not allow men to have sex with prepubescent girls.
If you look just at the Quran, you will get the indication that you can have sexual intercourse with a 5-year-old. If you just read the Quran, it is halal. It would be halal to have sexual intercourse with a 5-year-old.
I told you so.
Colin, what are you doing, my man?
Natty.
What are you doing? Why are you quoting Mohammad Hijab in the middle of a debate with people who reject the hadith, and you don't show the full context?
And this is going to sound quite scary for you right now, yeah? The reason why it's haram to have sexual intercourse with a 5-year-old is not found in the Quran whatsoever. It's found in the Sunnah. And in fact, if you look just at the Quran, you will get the indication that you can have sexual intercourse with a 5-year-old. We both agree that it's haram and it's wrong to have sexual intercourse with a 5-year-old. Okay, good. My premise today, my thesis today is as follows. The reason why it's haram to have sexual intercourse with a 5-year-old is not found in the Quran at all, but is in fact found in the Sunnah.
I wonder why you would do that. There's no way you're actually lying to your audience to make sure that they don't leave Christianity, But it seems to me what you said there is completely inaccurate, because I actually watched that video a long time ago, actually. And I'm sure I can find the footage. But I distinctly remember this was a debate. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to go to the footage. I mean, you can actually... Your own video shows that Mohammad Hijab is talking about if you only take the Quran and completely ignore the hadith, then you could come to a lot of different type of absurd conclusions, such as you can marry and have sex with a child. But obviously, the Islamic position is that no, you can't do that, right? Their hadith where Ibn Abbas clearly said that age of marriage is at puberty, right? Now, clearly you know this, right? Clearly you know that in your own video, it shows that Mohammad Hijab was talking about simply blindly following the Quran without the Sunnah or the guidance of the Prophet. And what's wrong with that type of thinking, right? There's no way you didn't know that you're completely taking Mohammad Hijab out of context. There's no way you'd do that, such an honest person like yourself. So at first, he he misrepresents being charitable. Ali Dawa. Then he misrepresents Yasir Qadi. Then he misrepresents Mohammad Hijab. If I was a very emotional person, I would say that I think you're lying.
Current events with Hamas have raised questions about the teachings of Islam, and something that I focused on recently was female war captives. Many of you know that the Quran repeatedly affirms Muslim men can have sex with their female slaves. I therefore conclude, try to stay with me now, that the Quran repeatedly affirms Muslim men can have sex with their female slaves. Surah 4, forbidden to you are married women except what your right hands own. Surah 23, believing men are to guard their private parts except from their wives or what their right hands own. And of course, Muhammad had this privilege as well in Surah 33. And Surah 70 also permits men to have intercourse with the women that their right hands own. These women are the property of Muslim men to be used at will, and
Christianity also allows this. There's no way you would lie to a Christian audience to make Christianity seem better than Islam, right? Because there are a bunch of verses that seem to confirm, it clearly says that, previous prophets had slaves and concubines. Concubines means slaves you can have sex with. For example, 1 Kings 11:2-3, it says, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. But please notice, the criticism against Solomon is not that he had concubines. The criticism against him is that he had wives that were following a different religion. That's the criticism. I wonder why the authors of the Bible never criticized this point about concubines. 2 Samuel 5:13, it says, and David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. Okay, so David, who, by the way, is a prophet according to the Bible, had concubines. Now, of course, Christians could say that, but that's the Old Testament, right? There's no way like the New Testament or Christians in the later times ever approved of this. According to Catholic Encyclopedia.
First, the Catholic Encyclopedia defines what a concubine is. They said, in its strict sense, it is used of those unions only in which the man and the woman are free from any obligation arising from a vow, the state of matrimony, or holy orders. Permanent concubinage, though it lacked the ordinary legal forms and was not recognized by the civil law as a legal marriage, had in it no element of immorality. It was a real marriage, including the intention and consent of both parties to form a lifelong union. This the Church allowed from the beginning. The Council of Toledo, held in 400, in its 17th canon, legislates as follows for laymen, after pronouncing sentence of excommunication against any who, in addition to a wife, keep a concubine. It says, but if a man has no wife, but a concubine instead of a wife, let him not be refused communion. Only let him be content to be united with one woman, whether wife or concubine.
Actually, prior to the Council of Trent, which happened in like 1500 years after Jesus died, Christians didn't have much of an issue with permanent concubinage. Permanent concubines, although they were not legally recognized, it was never considered as something that's immoral. It was a real marriage. And that's because that's exactly what the Bible allows. If you look at the Bible in the past, all these prophets like David and Solomon, it seemed like God allowed them to have concubines, which is why these early church fathers never saw an issue with this. So, Council of Toledo literally made a law that said that if someone is married, they cannot have a permanent concubine. However, if they're not married, there's nothing wrong with it, right? You can have a concubine. So, what do we make of this? Clearly, it seems like having permanent concubines was never an issue Now, someone could argue, of course, like, what about Council of Trent, right? They clearly outlawed concubines, right? Now, when it comes to understanding any religious tradition, historically what you have to do is that you have to look at the earliest period. You have to look at the first-hand accounts of how people practice those religion to have a proper historical analysis of those religious movements. And this is true for any religion. If you want to understand Hinduism, you have to look at how the early Hindus practice this religion. If you want to understand Buddhism, you have to look at what the early Buddhists, how they followed the religion. If you want to understand Islam, same thing. Same with Christianity. If you want to understand Christianity, you have to look at what Jesus said, or what his followers said, or what the early church fathers said, right? You don't look at some council that came like 1500 years later. So when we look at the earliest sources, or the primary sources, which is the Bible, it clearly says, and this is the primary source, that God allowed Solomon and David to have concubines. Okay, then later on, again, although the church fathers had some issues with it, they never had an issue with permanent concubines. Then later on in 400, they had an issue with having concubine besides your wife. So here you can clearly see it's a clear development, right? And then later on in 1500, you have Council of Trent, which outlawed everything, right? However, of course, if we do a proper historical analysis, we go what the Old Testament says. And clearly it says that you can have concubines, like 300 of them if you want. So, and even if we don't accept that, even from a New Testament or like the Christian understanding of this, church fathers still allowed concubines, permanent concubines. But anyway, so here's his argument in a nutshell, right? This is what the argument is. Having concubines are morally wrong. Christianity allows concubines. Conclusion, therefore, Christianity is morally wrong. Again, if you guys like the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you want to see more, then subscribe, of course, to the channel. And if you want to support me, you can support me by becoming a Patreon or by becoming a member. And yeah, see you guys next time, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.